Hey everyone, Tim Clapham here for FX PhD, and this is week 8 of the Cinema 4D215 course. This week we're going to start a new project which is going to span the last 3 weeks of the term. And if we just jump over to Illustrator, I've prepared this artwork, mocked this up. So I've taken like the concept of a fictional company called Toy, and we're going to make a short kind of animation ID using their logo, which is this strange thing that I've drawn here. And we're going to take this, build this in 3D, and the idea is that we have like a whole bunch of toys that travel up this tube here, and they get hit by this kind of comedy boxing glove. They travel round, and then at this point they turn into presents and they go up and down here. As they come through this first part here, I want the toys to all be untextured or just plain materials, and as they travel up through this part, I want them to kind of be coloured in. So it's almost like a little toy factory. Very simple. Obviously we don't have much time over 3 weeks, you know, and half an hour, 45 minutes per class. We only have a few hours to create this ID from beginning to end. So I'm going to go fairly quick, but if you do get lost on anything, please just ask as many questions as you like on the forums, and I'll do my best to answer them. So to speed things up, I've already set up a Cinema 4D scene. If we could jump over to Cinema, you can see, there we go. So what I've done is I've drawn some paths in Illustrator to represent this logo. And as you can see, they've been extended a little bit, but I've also manipulated it so that it's kind of a 3D path. We've got this slight curve to it so that we can add our tubing nice and easily. So the first thing that I want to do is to just check on the feasibility of a few things. For instance, how do we make this kind of concertina for the boxing glove? What's the best way to create all these sections? We've got this kind of concertina part here, so we need to make that. And really what I want to do with these sections is have them so they're almost a bit like, you know, like a water park, or they're see-through. They're basically going to be see-through tubes, but some of them are going to be striped, and we're going to be able to see all of our toys traveling through. And then at the end of it, hopefully we can add in some simple camera moves just to focus on some areas. So it's quite a lot to get done. So best thing is, let's get on with it. Here in Cinema 4D, first thing I'm going to do is just switch to my front view, F4, press Shift V to bring up the viewport configurations. And if we switch to the back tab, we can load an image in here. So you need to click on this ellipsis button. And there should be a JPEG included in the download called Toy Guide. So we just need to click and load that into there. Okay, like so. And the size of this is 1920 by 1080. So let's put that in. Okay, and you can see that now the splines that I've brought in line up because the artwork is taken directly from Illustrator. I haven't scaled it or anything, and these paths are taken from Illustrator. So as long as we don't scale or move anything, when we bring those elements in, they should all match. And as you can see, they do. So that's a pretty good start. Now we could go in and make all these pipe pieces and position them by hand, but to be honest, I don't really want to worry too much about being exactly true to this, where the joins etc. are, as long as we have the same feel. Obviously, if it was a real logo and you know, we had to be precise, then we might approach it slightly differently. But you know, this is just a bit of fun, so it doesn't really matter. As long as we more or less have exactly the shape, it doesn't matter about the joins etc. And I want to build it in a procedural way so we can easily you know, if we have to adjust the spline, it adjusts with it, rather than setting all of these as objects that we'd have to move them all and make sure the joins. So probably the easiest way to do this is with something like MoGraph. But of course we need to build this T section, we need to build these straight sections. So to do that, we're going to need to know the dimensions. So let's select this pipe pathwork, hold down the Alt key, and let's just first of all create a sweep, and then let's just drop a circle spline in there, and you can just hold Shift to do that. Okay, and now you can see the result, and if we just set this to wireframe, you can see that obviously that circle is too big. So let's scale this down, and I think somewhere around 80 looks pretty good. So we really want that to be around a radius of 80. So I'm really just using that as a guide, and if we come back you can have a look and you can see our 3D view. So first things first, let's create some of these pipes. Let's start by tackling the T-pipe first of all, probably the trickier of the two. I want to make sure all of these are the same length, so it's nice and simple for us when we're doing any maths involving duplicating these with cloner, etc. So we know that we've got a radius of 80. Let's give it a length of, say, 300. So I'm just going to create a new scene first of all, and I'm going to add in a cylinder. Let's set this to have a radius of 80, a height of 300. Let's set the rotation segments to be 12. We're going to subdivide this, especially important for the cylinders or the tubes that are going to be deformed around the curves. If we don't subdivide them, we're going to have to use a lot of segments to get a nice smooth deformation. So if we keep the polygon count low, use a hyperNURBS, it's going to be probably a more efficient workflow and give us a better result, and we can increase those subdivisions if we need it to be smoother, and we can keep it nice and low in the viewport. The orientation is set to +y. Let's set that to +x. Now, before we continue, I think probably we want to make the height of these a little bit smaller, because I want them to be 300 units when they're finished, but I need to add the end, the join at the end. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to set the height to be 280. So that gives me 20 centimeters to add on each end. So I've got 10 on each end. Okay, I'm going to select caps and just switch caps off for now. Let's take that and duplicate that cylinder, come back to the object tab and set this one to be +y. Okay, now we know that this is 280, so if we switch to coordinates and we set this to be 140 and select both of those, you can see that now all of those edges are lining up nicely. Okay, let's come up and add in a bool. If we drag both of those cylinders and drop them into that bool, and we switch to the object tab on that bool, and we set that to be A union B. And what we want to do is create a single object. And if we have a look now, you can see it's not quite working correctly. It is there, but that is not an opening, so it's not quite working quite right now. So if we select our cylinder that's on +y, and let's just add caps to this, and hopefully that will fix it. Okay, and there we go, and you can see now if we select that ball that we have the result that we're after in there. So we've got this T, so we've made that really quickly. So I'm going to just take this ball and press C to make it editable, and let's call this pipe T. And before we move on, let's just come up and save. Let's switch over to polygon mode, live select, and let's just delete these polys from the top. Press UL and let's switch to edge mode, and we can select this top edge. Now we can switch to our move tool and just pull this down. If we just come and have a quick look at what we've got here, we can see that we've got some problem with shading here. So it's almost like those edges aren't actually connected. If we switch to points mode, let's just have a quick look. Select this point, and if we pull that out, it does. Oh, there you go. You can see it's not actually connected to this polygon. So that's going to cause us problems. So we need to fix that. So let's switch to our front view. We've got a point up here that's stray. We can get rid of that. Now press K for your knife. And what we want to do is, if we switch to polygon mode and uncheck only select visible elements. First of all, let's just select these bottom polys, like so. Come back to your knife tool, uncheck visible only. Let's come to this vertex here and then hold shift. In fact, I just need to, let's press escape, zoom out a little bit. There we go. Okay, like so. Now, hopefully, if we switch to points mode, let's right click and choose optimize. Okay, and you can see the shading change then now, and look, there you go, and you can see that we've got rid of that. If I undo, you can see that we've got this problem area, and if we redo that by optimizing again, that fixes it. Okay, so that's definitely going to help us out. Now if we take this and drop it into a hyperNURBS, you can see that we're getting a really terrible corner there, and I'd like that to be much sharper. So let's select this. We're on our knife tool. I'm going to change the mode to be loop. And now what we can do, let's just switch that SDS off. If we come here, we can select where we want that cut to take place. Now the thing here is, if you want to make it accurate and you want it to be the same on both sides, we can do it numerically, because down here in the attribute manager we've got this offset. So what you do is you come to the viewport, move the cut to where you more or less want it, and then press shift. You can see that when you press shift, the cut changes to a different grey, and then it stays there. You can now come down here and adjust this numerically, so let's set that to 10, and then you just click in the viewport and that will then perform that cut. So we can do the same this side, hold shift, let's come down, this time we want it to be 90, and then press shift. And then finally we want one on our top tube as well. So let's just press shift, set that to 90, and then click to perform that cut too. Now if we enable that SDS object, you can see that we're getting a nice join. Cool stuff. Now the other thing that I'd like to do is give this some thickness. We could leave it with just a polygon for the thickness, but because we're going to be using a transparent material, it might be nice to actually have a little bit of thickness on there, and that will change the way that it renders. A bit like if you're rendering a glass bottle, you know, to make it look like glass, you really want to have thickness on that bottle. So we're going to do that on here. Now the simplest way to do that, let's just switch this off, is to hold down the Alt key, and let's do that by adding in a cloth surface. We're going to use this just to generate some thickness for us. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set the subdivisions to 0, come down to the thickness parameter, and let's set that to -5. And there you go, and you can see that that adds in that extra thickness. It's like a shell modifier in a way. It's not the greatest way of doing it, but it's one of the few ways we have in Cinema of achieving that. But if we switch this on and off, you can see it's adding in that thickness for us. Okay, so now I've got that thickness on there. I'm actually just going to press C to make that editable. I don't really want to leave everything as a procedural setup because it's going to slow things down, especially when we have a lot of these. So I'm just going to work on this as a polygon object. I'm going to switch over to polygon mode. Let's just select all, right click and optimize, just to make sure that the caps are on. You'll notice that because we used a negative value on our cloth, we've got inverted normals on the inside. So these are facing the right way and these aren't. So if we right click and choose align normals and then reverse normals, because they're all pointing inwards now. There we go. Otherwise we might have some problems with shading when we render this if some of the normals are pointing in opposite directions. Okay, so we're getting there. The next thing is UL for our loop selection, and let's select these ends, like, whoops, he says, there we go. This one, and the top one. We do them all together so they're all nice and even. Okay, let's press D for extrude, and this is set to 5 by default, which is perfect. If you remember, we have a 10 units that we can add on either end to make it 300. So if we add 5, first of all, click apply, and then hit new transform to do that again. So we've now got an extra edge here, so that when we add our subdivision surfaces, we're going to get a sharp corner there. Next is to select these loops like so. So you press UL once again, and then hold shift and come round and select these. And then we press D for extrude, and let's hit apply. And then let's have a look. And there we go, and that's looking pretty good, and it's all good inside there. So we've managed to create our first T-pipe, so I'm going to come up and save. Next we can make the straight pipes. This is going to be fairly simple, and to do this I'm going to use a tube. There we go, tube object, and we're going to set this to be +x. So the inner radius, if we remember, we set our cloth to be 5, so we want the inner radius to be 75 and the outer radius to be 80, so it matches the pipe that's already there. You notice that it does go a little bit smaller, of course, because of the subdivision surface, but if we switch that off, okay, and we set this tube to have 12 rotation segments as well, now if we select them, you can see they're matching up perfectly. Okay, so the tube, we would want to make this 280 as well, like so. And because this is going to be bending round corners, we probably want to add in some segments. So let's set the height segments to be 6. So we've got some subdivision there that we can bend around the corners. Okay, let's just hide the T-pipe for a moment. With this tube, let's call it pipe. Press C to make it editable. Press UL for our loop select, and if we select these ends, you can see that they're not actually attached. So we need to select all or deselect everything and then just run our optimize command. Now if we select these ends and we move it, you can see it's attached. What we actually want to do is select that end and this end. Press D and we're going to use the same as before. So we use 5 centimeters and then hit new transform. Let's come in and grab these ends. And let's press D again and hit another extrude like so. And now if we take this pipe and drop it as a child of our T pipe, unhide this, switch on our subdivision surface. Now we should be able to grab our move tool, and if we move this 300, just hold shift down to constrain it. And there we go, and you can see that they're matching up. Perfect. So we now have our 2 pieces of pipe. Let's come down and save once again. So I'm going to just take these 2 pieces of pipe, copy those, close this, and just paste them into here. Okay, the next thing that we can make is this kind of concertina thing. I imagine this is made of plastic. It's a little bit flexible. It'd be quite nice if maybe it moves around and wobbles around as if it's there's something going on inside. We know that we're using a radius of 80, so we should be able to just create a new scene. First of all, let's come up and add in a circle spline. Now, I want this to be kind of oriented along X, and at the moment you can see the Z axis is oriented that way, so we need to just change the plane. So let's set that to ZY, and now you can see it's pointing along the red X axis. For the radius, I'm going to set this one to be 75. Let's just take this and duplicate it by holding Control, and let's set this one to be, say, 90. Okay. If we then come up to the MoGraph menu, add in a cloner object, and let's drop these 2 as a child. Now it's set to iterate, which is cool because it's going to go small, big, small, big, small, big. Okay, and what we want to do is set this to be along X. So I'm going to set X to 10 and Y to 0. And you can see it's now duplicating that along X. If we set this to, say, 25, you can see how many we have there. Okay, cool. With that cloner selected, hold the Alt key down and let's come up and add in a loft. Okay, and when we do that, we get this interesting shape. It's a little bit organic and you see it's rounded. I want it to be a bit more angular than that. So let's select that loft, switch to the Object tab. What we can do here is we can just choose linear interpolation. And when we do that, we get this nice linear result. I'm just going to switch over so we can see the lines that are being created. And you can see that we've got quite a lot of geometry along this way. And maybe not so much going around that way. And the other thing, we've got caps on here. So let's first of all switch to caps and let's just set those to none. We don't want any caps on there. And probably what we want to do is adjust the subdivisions of our loft. So I'm going to set the mesh subdivision V to be 4. And I'm going to set the mesh subdivision U to be, say, 60. So it's a bit smoother going round and there's not so much geometry going along. And you can see that the topology is better now. It's more evenly spaced. And when we deform this, it will probably help with that deformation. Okay, I think we probably want to make it a bit more irregular and it needs to be longer as well. Because we're doing it procedurally, the great thing is we can just adjust the count on the cloner. Also like it to make sure that we kind of start either on a big or a small, so it's small at that end, small at that end. So that means we need to use an odd number. So let's just increase this. Yeah, say 37. 37 looks alright. Okay, I'm just going to grab this. Let's call this concertina and cut that from there. Close this project and let's just paste this into here. So we're getting some of our elements together fairly quickly. I'm going to just save the project once again. Okay, now we have these elements in place. What I'm going to do is just organize my scene, and you can see that these are already on layers, and if we bring up my layers you can see that I've got a layer called scene. I'm going to double click to create a new layer. Let's call this toys, and let's double click to create another, and let's call this pipe work. Okay, add in a null object, and I'd just like to use a few hyphens, dashes, and let's call this pipe work. Okay, and we can grab all of this stuff and drop that into there. This sweep we don't really need anymore because we just use this to kind of judge the radius. So we can take that spline out of there and we can actually delete that sweep. So we've got these splines that make up the structure, and we need to kind of attach these objects to it. Let's do the concertina first. It's probably the simplest. So to do that, I'm going to take this cloner object and I'm going to use a spline effector. Most obvious thing to do. So if we select that, choose MoGraph effector and add in a spline effector. And let's call this spline concertina so we know what it belongs to. Okay. So the spline that we want to attach this to is the path pipework, which is this one. So we drag that into the spline field. Okay, and there we go. And look at that. Doesn't that look great? So obviously the orientation is wrong and we need to adjust the start endpoints. So we come back to our front view. There's a couple of ways we can do this. We can either choose relative. So it then uses the relative spacing of our cloner object. That's particularly useful if you're using type and stuff like that, because it will maintain the relative spacing between the type. Or you can use step, which is the default. Oh, by the way, on relative you get the option to choose the axes, and because we're working on the x-axis, which is the default, it just worked. The other option is to use step, and then you can come down and adjust the heading here, set that to 90, and you can see that achieves the same result. We do, however, want to adjust the start point. Let's pull that across, and let's just set this approximately for now. And once we've got the pipes in, we can come and adjust this. And if you hold down the Alt key, you can scrub this with a bit more control. Okay, so let's take the end point and put that here. And now if we come in and have a look, you can see there's our concertina. As I mentioned before, it'd be nice to make this a bit irregular. It's very regular at the moment. If we come to our perspective and have a look, it looks like something brand new that's never been used. It'd be nice if it was kind of wobbling around and a little bit more irregular, and because we're using a cloner, we can easily do that just by adding in a random effector. So to select that cloner, let's call this cloner concertina so we know what we're talking about. Come to the MoGraph menu, choose effector and add in a random effector. It's going to go a bit crazy at first, not quite the result we're after. And what I'd like to do is make it so that the concertina is almost attached at this end and attached at this end, but the bit in the middle isn't attached and kind of wobbles around a little bit. So what we can do is we can use fall off. Let's call this random concertina so we know what we're referring to there. Okay, and in the parameters for this random effector, I'd like to use an animated noise. So the random mode is currently set to random. I'm going to change that to noise, and you can see the result already. Let's just press play and see what happens. So we're getting this funky result. But it's kind of the result that I want, almost. I'm going to set the space to be UV. Okay, so it's using the internal UVs of the cloner. If we switch to the fall off tab, let's set that shape to be spherical. So now it's not doing anything. Switch to our front view. Let's shift V and we can adjust the transparency of that background image because it's a bit bright. We only just use it as a guide. So there's my random effector. I'm going to pull this across. Okay, it doesn't seem to be affecting it. So let's come to our top view, and that's the reason why. Okay, so let's pull it back here as well. Again, you can just see it start to affect those as we move it into the middle. And let's just grab one of these handles, hold shift and just scale the whole thing up and just get it so that fall off just about touches the edge, like so. So it's about 170. Okay, now if we rewind and press play. Alright, starting to look interesting. It's almost doing what we want. It's just a bit chaotic. It's a little bit too much. It's too fast. So under the Effector tab, let's adjust the speed of that animation. And I'm going to set that down to say half that speed. I'm going to switch to the Parameter tab, and I'm going to just make it so that it only moves them maybe say 20 and less on Z. We're not going to notice that so much. Okay, now let's have a look. That's almost the result I'm after. And if we come back to the Effector tab, let's just increase that scale. So it's affecting more of the tube all at once. Set that up quite high, maybe even as high as like 1,000. Okay, there we go. So it's kind of subtle. If we just hide the fall off for that effector. But I think that's all we need it to be. So there we go. The first part is in place. Now we could build the pipework for the other sections. First of all, let's just save incremental. Let's organize the scene as we go. So we have this loft concertina. I'm going to put that into pipework. And this also has these two effectors, which would be good if they were there. I want the splines to be at the very top, just so they'd come before any effectors or any objects that might use them. And we're going to do these pipes next. Let's just grab this pipework null and hold down Control and just drop it onto that pipework layer, just so that we have all of those on the same layer. Now the next thing is to create the pipework, and we're going to do this with a cloner as well. So first of all, I'm going to add in a cloner object. Let's call this cloner pipe across. And let's drag these two pipes into here. Now the order of this is quite important, so what I want to do is set the pipe to be the top one and the pipe T to be the second object. Select our cloner, and under the Object tab, for the clones parameter, at the moment it's set to iterate, and if we just increase that, you can see that what it's doing is it's iterating normal pipe, T pipe, normal pipe, T pipe. We don't want it to do that. What we want to do is we want to change the clones mode to sort, and then we can control which object is used. So at this point here, we're going to want to place the T. And the same as we come up here, we're going to want to put the T here. So cloner pipe across, what I want to do is not move them on Y, of course. Set that to 0. We want to move them on X, and we want to set that to 300 because they're 300 units long. Okay, and then we can increase the count as long as we like. With that pipe across selected, hold down the Alt key and add in a null. Now the reason I'm going to do that is because I want to use a deformer. So if they're in the same hierarchy, then the deformer will work just fine. So with that null selected, hold down Shift and let's add in a spline wrap. And we'll call this spline wrap pipe across. And although it takes a few seconds to name your objects as you go, it is much easier than doing it at the end and trying to decipher what all those cubes were for. So there's our spline wrap pipe across. And the spline that we'd like to use for this is our path pipework. So we'll drop that into the spline field. And there we go. So at the moment we've obviously got far too many pipes, 22. Let's set that down to 6, say. I'm not sure how many we're going to need at the moment. But what we need to also do is on our deformer for the mode here, we want to change that from fit spline to keep length so that we retain that 300 units for each of these. Let's switch back to our front view so that we can use our guide. We're going to need more than that, so let's just maybe say 10. 10 looks about right. And we just need to adjust some parameters on our spline wrap. We've got the offset and we've got from and to, so we can actually offset these, and you can use negative values as well. I think the easiest way to check this is correct is to put the T section in here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a MoGraph selection for that. So if we select our cloner, come up to MoGraph and choose MoGraph selection. Now because we're using a deformer, the dots all appear down here before the deformation. If we switch that off, you can see there are the dots corresponding to each of our clones. We want to just select that second clone, and that adds in a MoGraph selection tag, and let's just call this T pipe. Add in our deformer again. So with that selection tag selected, come up to MoGraph, choose effector and add in a plane effector, and let's call this plane pipe T. Switch to the parameter tab, uncheck position. We don't want it to move the position, but one thing you'll notice is that now let's jump back, but if we enable position again, you can see that we're getting some weird results. This is because of the bounding box of our deformer, and as we change settings, that bounding box will change. It means the deformation will change, which is really kind of frustrating if you're not sure why it happens with a spline wrap. So what you should do with the spline wrap, if you want to maintain that, is you need to fix the bounding box. So you come down to the bottom here, bounding box, and just check fix bounding box. And now when we add in things like this position change and stuff like that, it doesn't adjust the deformation, which is the result that we're after. In this scenario, sometimes you may want that to actually affect it. The only thing we really want to use this for is to affect this second clone. So we've already got the selection added in here, and that comes from this tag. And because we had that selected, it's automatically added in there. You can type whatever you want in there. But we know that it's T-pipe, or the other way is you obviously just drag the tag into there like so. And what we want to do is we want to modify the clone, because we've set this to be in sort mode. We can use this effector to determine which clone is being displayed. So as we take this modify clone parameter and we just drag this up, once we get past 50, because there's only 2 children, you can see that this second piece here changes. So we can just set that to anything over 50 basically. And you can see that it's at the wrong angle, but it is now picking the T piece, which is cool. What we want to do is enable rotation. We should be able to just use our pitch here and adjust that. So that effector is switching the type of clone and rotating that one piece around. So it's really handy, because now we've got this set up. Say we come to our view, and the client might say, oh well, I think that the O isn't the right size, or oh look, I can see this is intersecting here, so maybe you want to just grab some points on this spline. If you've got your selection tool active rather than MoGraph selection. So yeah, so you could grab these points, and then as we move this around, you can see that everything follows with it. So that kind of leaves the whole setup fairly procedural. I'm not going to actually make that change, I just wanted to demonstrate to you. So you could add these pieces manually, but using this kind of procedural approach gives you a little bit more flexibility. And also, because they're in a cloner, we can use effectors to control the color. So we should be able to use that to decide which ones are stripy or what color the stripes are, and those kind of things. Obviously we need to line these up now. So if we come in and select our spline wrap, we can just drag this offset and hold down Alt and just pull this back. And I don't mind that it's sticking out the side there. You know, I think that we can frame this well with the camera to match the logo. So somewhere like that is pretty good. And if we come up this end, we need to adjust the two. You can see that as we do that, it's having effect over here. Let's just take a look at this. I think that's something like so. And let's just come back over here and let's just drag the from amount and pull this back. There we go. Beautiful. Okay. Now, of course, these are looking quite ropey because we don't have any subdivision on those. So I'm going to select this pipe across, hold down Alt and add in a null. Then with that null selected, hold down Alt and let's add in our subdivision surfaces. Okay, and we can set this to be, say, 2 for render subdivisions, probably high enough, and 1 for our editor, just so things are a bit quicker. And there we go, and now it's looking a lot nicer. Let's just name these objects. So we've got pipe work SDS, and then we just call this pipe work. Okay. And again, let's save. Let's fold out this, and I'm just going to hide this spline wrap. And the other thing is to just grab these and add them all to our pipework layer. So now if we want to hide that, it's really easy. If we just want to concentrate on what's inside, or if we just finding things a bit slow, it'll just help with workflow. Okay, now we just need to create these two parts, which are pretty self-explanatory considering we've just done that first one. We've got our two pieces of pipes here. Now you could use instances, which might be a good idea for the others, and then if you did ever want to change these pipes, then it would obviously reflect that on all of them. But for this example, I'm just going to leave them as the geometry objects that we've got here. Let's add in MoGraph cloner. We call this cloner pipe Y. Grab the pipe and the pipe T, and let's just control drag those into that cloner. Put it on that layer. Let's just drop that into the hierarchy so it's inside this null in the SDS. Select this cloner pipe Y, and again we're going to need to adjust the parameters, and let's set the count to 4, Y to 0, and of course the X position to 300. Okay, there we go. Come to our front view, and now if we press O to frame that object, first we need to rotate it around 90, and then let's pull that across and position it like so. We just pull this down. Okay. That looks pretty good. So you can see here our T isn't quite long enough and our concertina isn't reaching, so we just grab our spline concertina, spline effector, and then we can just grab that value. There we go. Okay, and of course we don't want it to iterate, we don't want a T up there, so we need to come back to our cloner pipe Y, and we set this to be sort, and then choose our MoGraph selection. Let's select this second one, and here we can just duplicate this. In fact, no, we don't need to duplicate this. All we need to do is make sure that we use the same name for this selection, and we can use this very same effector to change this one to a T. So this is called T pipe. So let's just paste that on there. Select the cloner and drag this effector into there. And there we go. Obviously it's facing the wrong direction, but we can simply take that cloner object and rotate that around -90. Okay, there we go, and you can see it's starting to take shape. The cloner here is in the wrong Z space, so we need to just pull that back as well. Okie dokie. And you can see that we're building this fairly quickly. Last one to do. Clone a pipe T. Okay. We don't need this. We don't want that effector on there. Let's just grab all this and drop it into this hierarchy. So there's our clone the pipe T. This needs to be on Z0, I believe. And pull this across. And just line that up here. That looks probably good enough. It's quite nice if it's a little bit inaccurate. Okay. Too many pipes. Let's just set that to 2. And if we look at the original artwork, you can see, or maybe you can't see, if we hide that you probably can, that there's this one piece at the bottom, then there's a gap here, and this is where the clones are all going to get coloured in, and then there's this top section. So what we really need to do is move this one up. I don't mind if the hole doesn't line up the same. What I'd like is that the bottom of these is aligned, yeah, so that's aligned. So now we just need to take this top one and move it up to fit there, and again we can just do that with a MoGraph selection. So let's just select this, call this top, add in a plane effector, put that onto the right layer. Doesn't seem to be doing anything, but I think if we come to our perspective view, you can see that it is. That's just because these are along X, so really, because they're pointing along X, as they were for this part, we need to move them along X, not Y. Even though it's world Y, we could change the transform node to be the effector, but we can just move it on X. Doesn't really make any difference which way we do that. Okay. Alright, that looks good enough to me. Cool. Good stuff. Alright, so we've more or less modelled the actual logo. There's another element which I think we should probably have a look at, and that is this boxing glove thing. Be interesting to see how we're going to make this kind of concertina wooden thingy. I'm not sure what you'd even call that. So before we end this class, I think we're going to tackle that. And then we've almost tackled all the modelling elements, and we know that the rig's going to work. We've got this moving a little bit. We want this to be rigged. And next week we can animate our toys going through, and we can start thinking about textures and stuff like that. Okay, I'm going to open a new scene, and if you think about this, we need to make sure that we make this the right size. We don't really want to be making it the wrong size if we're building a rig, just in case we have to scale it all and that screws up the rig. But we know that this has a radius of 80, so you know that's 160 diameter. So if we make these around 100, then that's probably going to be about right. So I think that's a fair enough starting point. So I'm going to create a new scene, and there's a few ways that we could build this. First time I built this before preparing this class, I built it using Espresso, and Espresso works fairly well, but it is a bit more of a limited approach, I think. Well, the way that I did it was, and so I thought maybe we could do it using inverse kinematics, which would give us a bit more flexibility, because although we only want it moving backwards and forwards on a horizontal plane, and it doesn't really need to deviate from that, it'd be handy to be able to build some rigs like this so that they're a bit more flexible, and then you can maybe use them for other things in the future. I don't know, that's how I kind of tend to work, so then I can keep these objects in my library. So we're going to build this using IK, and we can even make the actual concertina shape just with like a cloner first of all, just to try and save time, make things easier for us. And if you keep all your steps as well, then you can come back to it later and see how you've done it. So first things first, let's make the actual arms. So I'm going to add a rectangle spline. And for the size of this, I'm going to set it to be 100, as we said. And then I'm going to set the height to be 10. And then let's enable rounding. And now we've got this nice kind of rounded arm. If we take this and hold down the Alt key and drop it into an extrude, and that extrude needs to be a lot smaller, I'd say 10. But before I move on, actually, I'm going to want to make sure that I'm building this correctly. Yeah, let's set that to 10. Switch to caps and let's enable fillet cap. And we set the radius to maybe 0.5. Maybe even smaller, actually. Let's set that to 0.25. There we go. Just so we get this little edge. So we can call this arm. Okay. Next I'm going to add in a cylinder. And the cylinder I'm just going to put at each end, so it's almost like the joint that it swivels on. I'm going to set the object to be 3.5 with a height of 11, because we've got 10 as our extrude plus that small fillet, so 11 should just stick out. We can reduce those rotation segments down to about 12 just so they're a bit more efficient, and we want the orientation of that to be +Z. And let's add in a fillet as well, but let's set that to be 1 segment with a radius of 0.5. Okay, there we go. And there's a little bit of a thong shading issue, so maybe we just reduce that thong tag down to around 40, like so. There we go. Let's select this cylinder and I'm going to move it along X, somewhere around here. I think let's set that to -45. Let's call this a concertina. Let's create a duplicate and call this concertina end. Doesn't really, let's call that start. Okay, and we set this one to be 45, like so. Now, of course, the arm itself needs repositioning. If we come to our top view, you can see that we need to move that across. So we just need to set that to be 5, or in fact, we need to set that to be -5. Okay, there we go. So we now have our arm in place. Good stuff. Select the concertina start, hold down Alt, let's add in a null, and let's just call this A. And let's drag the rest of these in. So we've got our concertina start, the arm, and then our concertina end. Now we have these in a group. Let's select the top null, hold down Alt, and let's add a cloner. Okay. Now I want to duplicate these along X, not on Y, so that's the first thing to change. I'm going to set that to be 0. Okay, so under the Object tab, set the PY to 0. I'm not sure exactly of the amount that I want to move them along X, but let's just set that something around, let's say, 75. If we come to the Transform tab here, we can adjust the bank like so. And if we set that to be, say, -45. And what we want to do is we want to take every other clone and rotate it 90 degrees. So it comes down here. So we get that nice zigzag pattern. And it's probably easier if we do this from the front view. I'm going to set the count to be higher, let's say 6, and then with this, let's call this cloner A, because we're going to need 2 of these, but if we get it working on 1, and then you can simply duplicate that and create the other one. So with that selected, choose MoGraph effector and add in a formula effector, and that produces this funky result, which isn't the result that we want. So let's uncheck position and uncheck scale for now and enable rotation. For the formula itself, we're going to delete this. We're going to use a much simpler formula. We're going to use modulus, which gives you the remainder after division. So you go mod, and then we're going to use the ID of the clone. So you go mod, open parenthesis, ID, and then semicolon 2. So it's going to give us every other clone. Okay. And that's all we need to do. And then we should be able to adjust the bank like so. So if we set that to 90, so we're almost there. Now we need to actually enable position. Let's remove that, and we need to move them up. Okay. And then moving up based on the actual axis of the object itself. I think if we set the transform space to be the effector, then it's going to be a bit easier for us. We can just move them straight up and down. And I'm going to come in a lot closer, like so. And that's looking pretty good actually. 64 maybe. Let's come to our cloner and let's set this to be 64. Okay, so that probably wants to be a bit less. Maybe 63.6. I'll do. Doesn't need to be perfect. So let's set this to the same. There we go. And there we have it. Now we have our first zigzag for our arms. Now we do want each of these to be offset, so we could always do it like this. Set this to be 10. And you can see now that every other one is offset. But because we're going to be using IK, you need to be careful of this, because it means that the axis of each object is going to be there, and then there, and then there, and then there. And as they point at each other, they're going to be pointing in a sort of zigzag pattern. And I think that will upset the IK. And you'll end up with a kind of wobbly chain. And we want this to be very rigid. So I'm not going to do that. I'm going to set that to 0. Let's call this formula A. So we've set up the first one. Pretty simple. Okay. And now we just need to work out the IK, and then once we've done that, we can repeat the procedure and make a second one. Rather than make this cloner editable, it's a good idea to just control drag to duplicate, and then if we press C, then what happens is we get all of these as separate objects. Let's call this group A. And now what we need to do is we need to take each one and put it into as a child from the very bottom, as a child of the next object up. So A5 will come and sit here. And then grab A4, and that one will sit there. A3 up to here. A2. So we're creating a chain of objects, and then we can use these to create our IK. Okay, at this point I haven't saved yet, so I'm going to just save my project. Now we've got all the objects in the correct hierarchy, with the A0 being our very parent object here, and then the concertina end being the very last object. We should be able to set up some IK between all of these. Let's just do that first and see what happens. Now, for those of you not familiar with IK, it's pretty simple to set up. You basically select the very last object in your chain, then you hold down Control and you select the very first object in your chain. And you need to make sure that these objects are at logical hinge points, and you can see it's very obvious where the hinges are on here. And it will take each of these parents where the hierarchy changes, A2, A3, A4, it will create a hinge at each of those. So we select the last, hold down Control, select the first, and then you come to the character menu and you choose Commands, Create IK Chain. And then what will happen is it will perform a few things for you. So the first thing that it does is it adds an IK tag here. It then also adds in this null object called goal. It then takes that goal and it puts it into the IK tag parameter here for goal. And it also tells us what's the very end object of that IK chain. So it's basically set it all up for us. So now what we should be able to do, let's just save first of all, just for safety's sake. Grab this goal. If we press W for our world axis, and then we should be able to drag it and move it. And there you go, and you can see we're getting a result. We can pull it straight and we can squash it up. Not quite the result we're after. Let's just hide this other cloner. You can see that as we come closer, the whole thing kind of folds in on itself. And we can drag this up and down. It's not really the result that we want. And the reason for that is because of the way that IK works. So what we're actually going to have to do is we're going to have to set up 3 different chains of IK. One for this first hinge, one for the next one, and one for the next one. And once we've done that, we can then constrain the goals for these two to be linked so that they're always in the right place between the others. Probably doesn't make sense. The easiest way to see it in action is to do it. So let's just get rid of that tag. That's not the result we're after. Let's get rid of that null. So what I want to do first is create an IK chain between this axis and this axis. So we're going to have A0 and A2. So we select A2 just once, hold down Control, select A0, come up, let's just pop that off, and now we can create IK chain. So now it's created a chain and it's created this A2 goal, and it's just between these points, and we should be able to grab that, and there we go, and you can see that's now working just on that one section. Let's undo. Next we want to create exactly the same thing but between this and this. So we start on A2 and we end on A4. So with A4 selected, first of all, hold down Control and select A2 and then create IK chain. So now we've got this A4 goal, and if we move this, you can see that's working. If we grab our A2 goal, we can move that, and you can see both of those chains are working. So finally we need to set one up between here and here. So that is A4 all the way to the concertina end. Now we could use this cylinder here, and that would probably work fine. But the problem with that is if we wanted to then change any of these objects or move them around, it's going to affect our IK chain. So rather than use the object, what I'm going to do is select this, hold down Shift, and add in a null as a child. And then let's just zero that null out like so. And we can call this a end. And we actually don't want that as a child. We want that to just be sitting at the end there, like so. So that's our end object. And Control select A4. So we've got those two selected, and now we can create IK chain. So now we've got these goals. If we move that goal we just created, you can see that's working. If we grab the middle one, you can see that's working as well. So let's take these one by one and place them into our group. That means we can select this group and we can move the whole thing around, and our goals will all stay in there. But of course we've got the problem that we've got 3 separate goals. If we select all 3 of these and move them together, it's not going to do what we want either. So what we need to do is we need to maintain the position of the A4 and the A2 goal so that it's always exactly between here and here, or between here and here. And we can do that just by adding in a couple of constraints. Okay, so let's first of all set up the A2 goal, and if we select this object, this null, you can see the position that it is. Let's come in a bit closer. So this goal always needs to be between the very start point of our chain and this point here. Now we know that this point here is our A4 goal, and we know that this point here is the very top of our chain, our A0 null. So we need to constrain that A2 null between A0 and A4. So we can add a constraint to both of these. So I'm going to select both of them, right click, choose character constraint, and we want to add a position, scale, rotation. We're actually just going to add a position constraint. So let's enable PSR. If we switch to the PSR tab, you can see that we've got one target in here. Now if we just drag one target in here, what will happen is it will jump to that object. But if we click add and we add two targets, it will always maintain a position between those two. So it's a good way to keep an object kind of constrained between two other objects, which is exactly what we want. And we've got these weight sliders here, so you can weight it towards one object or the other. But we want it to be exactly in between, so we're going to leave those at 100. We don't need to worry about rotation. There's not going to be any rotation, so that can just remain selected or deselected. Doesn't really make any difference. So let's select the A2 goal, and let's select that constraint. And as I said before, we need to constrain this between A0, and as I drag this in, it's going to jump to that position. And then we need to drag in our A4 goal as the other target, like so. And there we go, and now it's back. And now if we grab this A4 goal, when we move that in, you can see the first two are doing the right thing. Because as we move this, let me undo, the A2 goal is moving up and down and maintaining its position. Now we just need to do the same for our A4 goal, and this needs to be between here, which is our A2 goal, and here, which is our end goal. So we select this constraint, we drag our A2 goal in here, it's going to jump over there, and then we add our end goal, and then it's going to jump back, and you can see that that is now correct. Okay, so the result doesn't look quite right, but the IK just needs to be refreshed. You can press play, and there we go. And you might find when you're working with IK that it doesn't always come back to its rest position. So there's a few ways to solve that. If I just move this, for instance, and press undo, you can see it's not quite right. But you can press A, keep pressing it to force a refresh. You can press play. Pressing play isn't always an option. It depends what else is in your scene. Or the other option under the character menu, we have a manager, we have auto redraw. Okay, and you can enable this and it will redraw automatically. So as I drag this, if I undo, you can see it kind of redraws itself. But just be careful using the redraw, because if you do have this enabled and you close this, it's going to carry on redrawing all the time. That's going to slow down everything. It's going to slow down your working. So if you do use this, it's probably a good idea to leave it docked so you can see whether or not it's enabled. So basically now we have our working kind of concertina effect. And if we just check it from above, it looks good. Now, we have forgotten one thing, and that is the fact that they're all joined up. But we can move these objects however we like, because it doesn't really make any difference, because the actual IK is based on these nulls, which is why I've grouped it like that. So what we can do is we can select these, and we can select every other set of objects, and we can then move them on Z, and we need to move them 10 units. So the way that we can do that is we can just go X plus or minus 10. So if we just go X plus 10, and there you go, and now we've got those there. But notice that our IK is still in a straight line, and that's because all of our nulls, if I just fold these down, are all in a line. Let me just check that that's still working. There we go, it's still working. And be careful if you start to do it arbitrary, it could break. Try and always use like the handle. Try and keep it on a 2D plane. It should work 3D, but the IK tags are set as a 2D solver. So try and move it like so. Okay, so that's the first one done. To make the other side or the other angled pieces, we can take the cloner that we've already got and the formula effector and duplicate those. Let's just call this cloner B, formula B, and let's control click to enable these. I'm going to hide the IK rig that we made and enable the Cloner A and Formula A, just so we've got them as a guide. And let's switch to our front view. Now with Cloner B, we need to select the effectors and remove Formula A, and we need to put Formula B in there. Okay, so it's doing exactly the same at the moment. Let's just disable Formula B for a moment. Take our cloner. We need to set the bank to be 45, like so, and then we need to grab the object itself and pull that up. And that will go up to 63.5 as well. Now when we enable our formula, let's see what happens. Okay, so it's putting them up there. I'm going to just hide this one now. So we need to take these and we need to move them. We need to rotate them. -90. Okay, and then we need to pull them down. So we could set that to minus. And there we go. So now we have our A and B and they're intersecting correctly. So once you've got this far, obviously you need to create an IK chain for the second cloner. So take cloner B, control drag, press C, let's hide these. And then again you need to drag these up and create the correct hierarchy. And I'm not going to go through the whole process of rigging both of them. We've already done one. If you're not sure of the correct process, just rewind and watch it again. You need to make sure that you select this and then this, create your IK chain, then select this and then this, create your IK chain, then here and create your IK chain. So for example, the first one, we just select A2, A0, we choose character, create IK chain. We now have our A2 goal, and then just check that it works. And then repeat that for these two and these two. Then add all your goals into the B group and add your constraints just as we did before. And at the end of it, you should end up with something like this. And you can see that I've set up the second IK chain as well, but I've actually made a mistake, and when I created I didn't change the A to a B. So what I'm going to do is just select all of these, and it's an A with a space as well, which is handy, so we can just select all of these. We can choose tools, naming tool, and we can go replace A space with B space, and thankfully that will do it for us. Okay, let's just fold that up. So we've got this end goal and this end goal, and we should be able to grab these and adjust the IK. I kind of like the way that you get these uneven shapes. Looks pretty cool. But of course we don't really want to be grabbing both of those and moving them, and also we should have this boxing glove on the end. Now I'm not going to have time to model a boxing glove. Maybe you can go and find a free model. Maybe you've already got a boxing glove model hanging around, but I'm just going to simply add in a sphere. Let's just take these two, fold them up, select both of those, press Alt-G to group them. And let's call this Concertina Boxing. Okay, and now what I want to do is, with that selected, just hold down Shift and add in a sphere. Let's just zero that out, and I'm going to set that size to be, say, 55, and let's pull this across somewhere around here. And then if we take the A end goal and drop that into that sphere, and we take the B end goal and drop that in there as well, and then I just want to take this and put it at the very bottom of that hierarchy so that these end goals are after all the constraints, etc. Now we should be able to grab that sphere and we can use that as our boxing glove stroke IK controller. So we've created this, I think I've spelt that wrong, haven't I? Concertina. There we go. So that is now built. We now have our concertina. We should be able to grab this, copy it, let's save this, close it down, and paste this into here. And if we grab this and put it up here, you can see that that fits perfectly. whereabouts we position it. I'm not exactly sure. We need to grab that sphere and let's just come in and have a look. You know, we want it to kind of go bang, 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 something like so. Okay, cool. So there we go. We've achieved quite a lot in the last, however long it's taken, 45 minutes, an hour. Ready to move on next week and start adding in all the toys, traveling around the tube. And as I say before, they're going to start here untextured. They're going to travel up, become textured, move around. And as they go into this part, which will be opaque, they're going to change into kind of boxes of presents. So it's almost like a toy factory wrapping them up. We're going to use dynamics as well, so they interact with each other. We've got this boxing glove that's going to be hitting them along. So it's kind of fairly fun. It's a little bit limited in what we're going to do. There's a lot more that we could do with it, but obviously time is not on our side. We could spend like a whole term creating one project and it still might not be enough time. That's the nature of this industry. It's very time consuming. So hopefully you learned a few handy tips and tricks there, and if you've got any questions on any of this or any problems, then please post on the forums. Other than that, thanks very much for watching. Have a great weekend. I'll catch you all next time.